I work at a car parts factory where I make brake parts. It's not glamorous, but story one, someone's got to do it, and I'm grateful for the job. My shift runs from 4 to midnight 5 days a week for 8 hours. Each day during that time I operate this old, outdated machine I've got to wear. Safety glasses, earplugs, steel-toed boots and a denim apron every day. I meet my production goals, and if I'm lucky I might get a bonus at the end of the year back at home. I've got a cozy 3-bedroom house, a lovely wife, and 2 sons who are both in grade school. After 12 years of marriage, things were going pretty well, that is, until today. We have 5 workstations where we put together the brake shoes. They all run on compressed air, and in 8 years we haven't had any issues with the equipment, but today right in the middle of the shift, the compressed air system suddenly froze. Up the air we use to power all our machines needs to be completely dry. It goes through filters and dehydrators. Usually without a hitch, but tonight the dehydrator system failed to get rid of the moisture it collected. I'm no expert, but when moisture mixes with high-press air, things freeze up and everything stops working. Instead of having us wait around, they just sent the whole crew home without pay. Of course, it's like my whole day got ruined. Because of the humidity messing up the equipment, when I walked into the bedroom, all I saw was a big, hairy back bouncing up and down on my wife Mary. The first flipped on the overhead light thinking she was just sleeping, but then I realized what was going on. Gone, what the heck, Danny, why are you home? I expected her to be scared or sorry, but instead she was just angry. What the big deal? Don't act clueless, you know exactly what's going on. I'm sorry you had to walk in on this, but if you had come home on time, none of this would have happened. He never would have been here, or I never would have seen him. A hairy guy flipped over and gave me a smug look. Marcy half-heartedly covered up with the blankets. My mistake was trying to grab the guy when he got off the bed. He was way bigger standing up. I ended up on the floor struggling to breathe, and I blacked out. Next thing I knew, I was in the ER getting my ribs wrapped up. Marcy was sitting nearby. Looking disgusted after the tech finished, Marcy and I were alone. Marcy, who the heck was that guy, and why was he in our house? His name's Tony, he's a friend, and I invited him over. You were sleeping with him in our bed with our kids sleeping nearby. Yeah, I know if you hadn't made such a fuss, they wouldn't have woken up. I had to call my sister to watch them so I could bring you here. What the heck was he doing there? How many times are you going to ask the same thing? We were having closeness. Is that so hard to understand? Is this a regular thing or was it just this one time? Tony and I have been seeing each other for about 6 months now. We tried to keep it under wraps from you. Usually we don't come here, but I couldn't find a babysitter. Is it done now? No, it's not. Over Danny, you're a good dad and husband, but Tony's amazing in bed. I don't see why should we stop just because, you know, but I promise we won't meet here anymore. It's not fair to you or the kids. That's not okay. It ends now, Danny. If you try to interfere with my thing with Tony, you'll regret it. He destroys it without breaking a sweat. It'll happen again if you try anything, and everyone will know you couldn't handle it. Our friends, neighbors, and even your family will know what a loser you are. Your work buddies will call you pathetic. Think twice, Danny. Your life will be a nightmare. Even our sons will be embarrassed by you. Don't you care what people think? You'd make yourself look bad just to hurt me. I will if I have to. But I'm pretty sure you won't risk it. Tony thinks you're weak, and I agree. You'll have to deal with it. Danny boy, who is this guy anyway? Where does he work? He doesn't, Danny. He owns Continental Classics, that fancy car shop on Lancaster Pike, you know, the one you always wanted to visit but never did. That's all, Danny. He's wealthier, smarter, and better in bed than you, and it seems he's also tougher and better at fighting. Why not just marry him if he's so amazing? That's why you're still here, honey. Tony's not into kids, and I'm not giving mine up to be with him. You get to play with him and Dad while Tony gets all the fun. Can't you see that I'm supposed to be okay with this? You don't have a choice. Either deal with it or everyone will know what a loser you are. Oh, and I'm moving your stuff to the guest room. No need for us to share a bed now that everything's out. I watched Marcy leave. and felt a bit relieved, just curious who looked after the kids when you were out with Tony. Usually Karen watched them, but sometimes I dropped them off at your parents' place, and by the way Karen introduced me to Tony, I made a mental note to thank Karen as Marcy left. They let me go the next morning. Marcy wasn't there. I had the choice of calling someone or taking a taxi. I chose the taxi because the kids were at school and Marcy was nowhere to be found at home. Clothes and personal stuff were piled up on the guest bed. I figured Todd and Terry would have questions about the setup, but I planned to let Marcy explain it. It didn't take long, maybe an hour, to sort out my new living space. During that time all kinds of thoughts were swirling around in my head. There was no way this was going to go down the way Marcy wanted it to. First thing, I went down to the basement and found my old phone recorder. It only worked with the landline, but I had no other choice. Marcy mostly used her cell phone for calls. It took about 20 minutes to set it up and hide it behind some old paint cans. It was a start. I felt like crap, but I was well enough to head back to work. They offered me some pain pills, but I wasn't keen on taking them and then operating machinery. I opted for a couple of strong Tylenols instead of one. Thing Marcy totally misjudged was my bond with my work buddies. I spilled the beans to them about what went down the night before. They had all sorts of ideas, some good and some not so much. It was comforting to know my friends had my back when we needed them. We had an 8-hour shift ahead, and each of us was determined to brainstorm ways to make things right. Took a break for dinner in the middle of our shift. Anyone got a plan? I asked. Glenn spoke first. I don't have a plan, but I've got a cousin who works for the guy who handles all the car detailing. The word is he can't stand the boss. If you need info about the business or anything else, he's your guy that could come in handy. Glenn, anyone else? Danny, I've got a couple of Magnums. You can borrow any of them. They're not registered, so no worries there. Thanks, Barry, but that seems a bit much for me. Well, shoot then. You don't want to hear my idea, Barry said. We chuckled at Barry's comment. Spill it, Freddie, what's your idea? I asked. I was thinking we tie him to a tree with his legs spread and light a fire between them like the old Indian style. Everyone thought Freddie's idea was great, but we all decided against it. Kyle was the only one who hadn't spoken up, so we waited for him to share while we ate lunch. Why are you all staring at me? Yeah, I've got an idea, but it's a bit out there. Let's hear it, Kyle. I remember hearing about this prison in Arizona that made all the bad people wear pink jumpsuits. It was meant to humiliate them, something like that. Could still embarrass him, so you're saying we should put him in a pink jumpsuit, but wouldn't he just take it off? I was thinking if we could get to him, tie him up, and then spray paint him pink all over, that might work, but wouldn't he figure out who did it? We'd have to knock him out first, then leave him tied up until he's found how pills, or maybe hitting him over the head. What's your plan? I can get a taser. We sneak up on him and zap his sounds. Easier said than done. How do we catch him alone, and how do we get close without him knowing? I don't have all the solutions. I just thought it was an idea. The buzzer sounded, signaling another 4 hours on the machines. My quota was down for the night, so the other guys helped me out to even things up. Marcy was already in bed when I got home. At least she was keeping her promise not to bring the jerk into our house. Did you ever try that thing out? Nope, not yet. Anyone wants to be the guinea pig? The response was just a chorus of groans. No one had fresh ideas, but they were all ready to back whatever I came up with. It feeling good to have some supportive friends. Things were typical at home when I arrived. It would be a short night for me. Working the graveyard shift messes up your sleep, especially on weekends. I was up earlier than usual. Todd and Terry were excited about a trip to Chuck E. Cheese's. Marcy didn't seem to mind, especially when I mentioned we'd be out all day. Danny, I need you to take some vacation days the week after next. Tony's buddy Wally is visiting from Detroit, and we're taking a 3-night cruise to Cancun. Can you handle it, or should we ask your folks? Wait, you're going on a cruise with 2 guys? Sounds sketchy, even for you. Don't be rude, Danny. It's not like you and Wally will share a room with Karen. They've been pals for years. Oh well. That changes everything, I said sarcastically. I'd owe Karen big time. For this, I didn't know what to do next. Most of the ideas the guys and I discussed were like childish pranks. Felt as useful as putting a flaming bag of dog poop on his doorstep. I needed real revenge by noon. I was up the kids were at school and I could hear Marcy moving around the house. After a quick shower and shave, I headed out the door. "Morning, husband, no kiss for your wife." Marcy stood by the kitchen sink, hand on her hip, with a smirk. I just walked out. Without a word, her sarcastic comment didn't deserve a response. I needed lunch, and some time alone with the rest of the afternoon was spent killing time trying to figure out what to do to Marcy's lover without causing too much trouble. For myself, I had work tonight and needed to get ready. I decided to stop eating meals at home. It was the only time I got to spend with the boys, but I couldn't stomach Marcy's cooking anymore. Before I knew it, it was time for work. Normal until dinner break. "Danny, I've got the tester in the car. I don't know if it'll be useful, but at least you'll have it for self-protection." Kyle seemed pleased with himself. "Don't forget to grab it before heading home." I started the day way too early to pass time before Chucky's opened, and we hit up Hobby Lobby nearby. The boys were old enough to handle the plastic models on the shelves. The final products weren't impressive, but they had a blast while they explored the model boxes. I wondered, amazed at the variety of items available for creative homemakers. If only Marcy had been into crafts, maybe she wouldn't I have brought that hairy gorilla home, but it was too late now. My eyes lit up when I found rows of designer spray paint cans. Among them were 6 beautiful pink cans. They didn't have as much paint as Lois or Home Depot, but they were pink, and that was all that mattered. Todd picked a monster truck kit, and Terry chose a tugboat. Plastic tugboat models were news to me before leaving, so I grabbed a pack of 10 large plastic cable wraps. They looked like they'd do the job by then. Chuck E. Cheese was open. Devoured 2 pizzas and spent about 4 hours there before they burned out. We grabbed some cheap bread and headed to Pandora Park. The ducks gobbled it up in 10 minutes, but we stuck around for a couple more hours before heading to my parents' house. Mom and Dad were glad to have us over for dinner in the evening. Todd and Terry spent most of the night glued to the TV, so I took the opportunity to fill Dad in on what was going on with Marcy. It dawned on me that I was sharing the situation with others before Marcy could. She was threatening to do the same thing I was already doing. That almost made her threat pointless. Dad assured me to take care of the boys no matter what happened. That was a relief. I didn't want the boys to get hurt by all of this. Around 9 o'clock. I called Marcy to tell her we'd be staying at my parents' house for the night. I got her answering machine after a hearty breakfast at AITA. We returned home to find Marcy still in bed. I immediately fired up the lawn mower and started mowing in the back. Near the bedrooms, Todd and Terry were eager to work on their models despite the beautiful weather outside, so I decided to dedicate the whole day to yard work. There was trimming and pruning to be done, but progress was slower than usual because I found myself stopping to chat with neighbors. Although I had hedge clippers, I borrowed a pair from Mike Fielding across the street. His wife Mary was known as one of the biggest gossips in the neighborhood. Told Mike that there might be unfamiliar cars parked near the house because Marcy would have some male friends over. Everything should be fine unless they get too loud or rowdy. If that happens, just call the police. It was tough for me to manage things given that I worked nights. Larry Finley served on the board of directors at the local church. Borrowed a spark plug wrench from him and apologized for Marcy's recent erratic behavior. Naturally, he wanted to know what I meant. Larry was even more of a gossip than Mary Fielding. Within 10 minutes, he had enough gossip to last a month. I skipped lunch and wrapped up work around 4 in the afternoon. After a quick shower, I treated myself to a meal at Rose's Cantina, opting for the priciest item on the menu. I couldn't tell you what it was, but it tasted fantastic. The rest of the evening was spent with my brother Dave, and his family. Dad had already filled him in on the situation. I crashed on his couch the night my wife had this grand scheme. She thought she could control me by threatening to expose me as pathetic if I didn't accept and support her. Cheating, she'd make my life a living hell. It was a clever idea, but it had plenty of holes within a week. Already spilled the beans to everyone, which pretty much rendered her threat useless. Plus I managed to make her look even worse than she imagined. I don't think she expected any retaliation. The next afternoon I swung by the house to change for work, and there was Marcy boiling with rage. "What on earth have you been telling the neighbors?" Karen said. "You've been spreading rumors that I'm running a brothel here at night." "Come on, Marcy. That's nonsense. I simply mentioned to them that you might have male visitors while I'm at work and they shouldn't make a fuss about it. Well, that's not how it's being passed around. Who else have you been getting along with? I told everyone. Thought it'd be better if they heard it from me first and didn't say anything to your folks or sisters, though you might want to talk to them before they catch wind of it. Damn it, Danny, you're making me look like well, fair's fair. You were going to make me look like a fool. Sorry, honey, but I got to head to work and got to hang out with the boys a bit. Before heading out, the hardest part was not getting the quality time I wanted with them. Glenn had some good news. Continental Classics closed at 9 on Thursday, so Tony could do payroll in peace even though the cleaners were gone. Kyle showed me how to use the tester, no volunteers for testing, though the plan was coming together if I got caught and I likely would I'd be facing jail time. Didn't give a damn. Tony DeMarco had to be embarrassed if I got arrested. I'd make sure the whole story hit the papers and TV. Any publicity like that would either ruin him or piss him off enough to do something stupid. For the next few days, I only went home to sleep and shower. And change. Haven't eaten a meal there since that first day. Finally Thursday came. Arranged to have my truck's battery die, so Kyle picked me up. The floor supervisor didn't hassle the brake guys much. As long as we hit our quotas and kept the quality up, they left us be. What helped me was the OSHA rules for the job with the apron, gloves and welding goggles. We all looked pretty much the same. At 8:30 I slipped out the back. The guys would take turns covering my station. One post would be empty, but no one really minded. Bathroom breaks were normal and not watched. The key was to make it seem like I never left. I entered through the employee door at Continental Classics and headed straight for the bathroom. Around 9 o'clock, someone did a quick check before turning out the lights. 10 minutes later, I put on latex gloves and stepped out of the restroom into a dim office area. His desk, facing away from the door, focused on an old adding machine. With paper tape, it seemed easier than I thought. With him preoccupied, he didn't hear me coming. I used the taser right on Tony's back, and I did that again, fearing he'd turn around. This time he twitched a bit and then relaxed. Perfect. I secured 2 plastic cable wraps on each limb and found an old tie to use as a blindfold. He was surprisingly cooperative. I wheeled his chair to the glass window facing the showroom. He'd be on full display when his staff arrived in the morning. The pink paint didn't stick as well as I hoped, soaking into his clothes fast. It took multiple coats to get the effect I wanted. I barely had enough paint, but got the job done. He looked quite fetching in pink. Once I was done, I packed everything back carefully. I thought Tony would wake up during my little decoration session, but he didn't stir. I planned to take off the necktie blindfold before leaving, but he still hadn't woken up despite being on schedule. I wanted him awake before I left. After 5 minutes of waiting, I started getting anxious. I tried feeling for a pulse but couldn't find one. The latex gloves were blocking it. I took one off and tried again, but still no pulse. I even tried finding a pulse on his neck like they do on TV, but had no luck. When I removed the blindfold and touched his eye with a pencil tip, didn't react at all. It was alarming. Feeling panicked, I put the latex glove back on and wiped everything I might have touched. I kept the necktie in my pocket and cut off the plastic ties. Removing them revealed marks from the pink paint, making him look like a pink raccoon with the white skin underneath. After making sure I didn't miss anything, I headed back to work. On the way, I ditched everything, including the tea, in a storm sewer. 10 minutes later I was back at my station making brake shoes. No one seemed to notice I was gone. When the shift ended, I told the guys what happened. They didn't seem concerned. Freddie was impressed. Kyle drove me home, and we both remembered the time. Dropped me off. I didn't get my usual amount of sleep. Around 10 o'clock, Marcy burst into my room. "What did you do, you little jerk?" I just rolled over and looked at her, confused. "What are you talking about?" "Tony's past Karen called and said they found him in his office this morning. I think you had something to do with it. And you're going to pay for it." That was the second time she called me a jerk in 5 minutes. It was clear I wasn't going to get any more sleep. I got out of bed, used the bathroom, and then took a long shower and shaved slowly. I even put on some aftershave just to annoy my lovely wife. I didn't even make it to the coffee pot. There was a tall black man in the living room talking to Marcy. He had short hair and was wearing a dark suit. Marcy had called the cops, no doubt about it. I shook my head and went into the kitchen to make my first cup of coffee for the day. Marcy had a sly grin on her face when I settled into my favorite recliner. The unexpected guest followed suit, Mr. Mercer. I'm Detective Donnell Green with an E. I'm here about Anthony DeMarco's passing. Last night your wife mentioned a disagreement between you two. Last week. Mind if I ask you a few questions? Sure, but not here. What do you have in mind? Let's chat in your office, not at my place. Is that all right? I noticed Marcy's frown, probably because she thought she'd be part of it. Your car or mine? Mr. Mercer, I've got some errands to run, so I'll meet you there in any specific office. Second floor, room 206. Take a right off the elevator. See you soon. Marcy was boiling as I slipped on my shoes. I ditched the unfinished coffee in the sink, then shot her a grin on my way out. It looks like you're getting what you wanted, sweetheart. What are you talking about? What's going on, Danny? 10 minutes later I was seated with Detective Green on the second floor of the municipal building for the next hour. Detective Green asked all the necessary questions, and I responded accordingly. Delicately touched on the affair without dwelling on it or making it a big deal. I admitted I had a reason to be upset, but clarified I hadn't acted on it. It was a serious situation, but I tried to stay friendly without being snarky. I think he appreciated that I cooperated even though I couldn't provide much insight. The most surprising part was learning Tony passed away due to a heart issue. He had a pacemaker fitted a couple of years ago, which apparently didn't mix well with the taser. They could tell from the marks on his neck. I felt conflicted about Tony's passing, partly sad and partly relieved. Detective Green reminded me not to leave town and mentioned he'd check my alibi. It was strange needing an alibi, but it added a thrill. We parted on good terms, and I sensed Green was on my side, which was reassuring. After grabbing a quick meal, I caught up on the TV news. They covered the passing of a local businessman, noting he didn't have any known relatives in the AA area. I withdrew all the money from our bank accounts and treated myself to a nice breakfast. When I got home, Marcy wasn't around. It took me about 30 minutes to move my stuff back to the master bedroom, and hers to the guest room. The guest room was pretty cramped with just one small closet and dresser. I piled her things on the bed, leaving it to her to sort out. I checked the phone recorder in the basement, but there wasn't anything noteworthy. I gathered up all our financial and insurance documents along with other important papers. Luckily, Marcy's Volvo was in my name, which made things simpler. I stashed everything in a folder under the front seat of my truck. I called work to take 2 weeks off. A few hours later, when Marcy came home, she seemed surprised to find me there. Time to set things straight. I grinned and led her to the guest room. What's all this? Who do you think you are? Responded with a smirk. Talk to me. What's happening? Marcy, from now on I'll be in the master bedroom. You get the guest room. Better start putting away your clothes. Anything left out by supper time is getting tossed. Got it? I can't fit all my stuff is in that tiny closet, and I'm not staying in that room anyway. What do you mean by tossed? If it doesn't fit you, don't need it. This won't fly. Danny, whatever game you're playing, it's not going to work. You're in trouble. Better start getting organized. Any more questions? Ask me later, bastard. That's the third time today she's called me. She must be on to something. While Marcy was occupied in the guest room, I dumped her purse on the kitchen table and took my time sorting through it. I grabbed her cell phone and car keys first, then her driver's license, credit cards, debit cards, and cash from her wallet. I left everything else behind. Next, I retrieved her car title from the pickup truck and drove her Volvo across town to a friend's car lot. I sold it to him at a decent price with the understanding that he would sell it wholesale out of town even after paying off the loan. I pocketed a few thousand as I was heading into Taco Bell for lunch. My cell phone rang. You jerk, where's my phone and car? Marcy's angry voice came through the house phone. It was a good test. I could check the recorder when I got home. Honey, I needed cash for a lawyer to defend me from the murder charges. I'll get you another car once I'm out of jail. I hung up and turned off the cell phone. After that conversation, I realized hiring a lawyer was a must regardless of the outcome. I wasn't staying married, but that would have to wait. It was my turn to order. Todd and Terry were home when I returned. I went straight to my sons and ignored Marcy completely, though I couldn't help but notice her displeasure. The boys were excited to show me the models they had built when Marcy started preparing dinner. I strolled down the hall to the guest room. All my clothes were neatly laid out on the bed, and Marcy's were back in the master bedroom. I chuckled to myself, but decided not to argue. She was stubborn and determined right now. Marcy called the boys to wash up for dinner, and I went to the guest room to unpack my things again. As much as I wanted to toss out all her stuff, felt too immature tonight. I treated myself to Red Lobster. Money wasn't a concern since I still had cash left over after paying the divorce lawyer deposit. The shrimp and lobster combo was delicious, but those cheese rolls were still my favorite. After finishing my meal, I turned my cell phone back on, hoping for a call from work or Detective Green. Instead, it was my wife. Danny, how am I supposed to go grocery shopping? We need milk and a few other things. I'll take you when I get home. Let's try to do our shopping on Saturdays when I'm off work. I'd feel better if you didn't go alone. Oh, I've got another call coming in. I got to go. We'll talk when I get home. Kyle called next. Detective Green and interviewed the whole crew, both individually and as a group. Everyone's stories matched up. Tom tingled the floor. The manager was particularly supportive. He insisted there was no way I could have missed work. He kept close tabs on everyone and could vouch that I was there all night. I knew I wasn't that slick. If some investigator wanted to prove I destroyed Tony DeMarco, they probably could. It seemed like nobody really cared. I made it home just in time to tuck the boys into bed. Marcy was sitting on the couch with a glass of wine. I grabbed a cold beer from the fridge and settled into my recliner. The TV was off, so I thought it might be a good time for Marcy and me to chat. Marcy, how's the plan to make me look like a pushover and pathetic going? That ended the conversation before it even started. Marcy finished her wine, got up, and headed to her bedroom. I thought she wanted to talk. Guess I was wrong. I took my beer and went to check the recorder. The first call was to her sister. No secrets there, it seemed. Knew all about the affair with Tony and was fully behind Marcy. That was good to know. The next call was to Marcy's mom. And it was a bit different. Mom had no clue what was going on. Her daughter convinced her that Tony was just a friend of Karen's and that I was jealous because I'd been trying to hook up with Karen for years. Tony gave me a lecture about it, and I got upset. She didn't say outright that I ended him, but she definitely implied it. She tried calling the cell phone company to replace the phone I took, but had no luck. Next, she called the DMV to report her missing driver's license. They advised her to report it to the police. Then she contacted the bank to request a replacement credit card, but they informed her the account was closed. Have to give her credit, she kept herself busy. The final message on the machine was to Karen. Even though Karen lived nearby, they used the phone instead of meeting up. Odd choice, but it worked in my favor. From that call, I learned two important things. Wally was still coming from Detroit, and Marcy planned to lay low until he arrived. The boys and I were up bright and early the next day. We left the house before Marcy woke up and returned after lunch. Marcy insisted I drive her to the grocery store since she no longer had a car or license that evening while she cooked dinner. Checked the recorder. Wally had arrived, and he immediately called Marcy. Their conversation was quite intriguing. He believed everything Marcy told him and promised revenge. Wally and Tony were childhood friends, and he wasn't going to let this slide. He gave Marcy his contact details and told her to call him the next day. Marcy then excitedly called Karen, expressing her happiness. It was hard to believe this was the same woman I'd been married to all these years. The change was sudden and complete. I didn't realize my actions were so severe. Aside from dealing with her lover, I grabbed a burger before heading to bed. The lawn needed mowing again, so I had a good reason to steer clear of Marcy. The next day around 11, Marcy's parents came to take the boys for a sleepover. I didn't know about it beforehand but decided not to object. Tomorrow was a school day, and Grandma Wilcox assured them they'd be back on time. I was eager to check the phone recorder, but first I grabbed lunch since I missed breakfast after a quick shower. I headed to Denny's. Marcy didn't mention that I wasn't eating at home anymore. Marcy and Wall cooked up a plan to get back at Tony's passing. It all seemed kind of silly, especially since I was in on it after Marcy and I hit the hay. Wally would sneak in through the back deck sliding door. She assured him it'd be unlocked if all went according to plan. It would look like a burglary gone wrong. Both Marcy and Karen called emergency when they heard the noises. It might sound dumb, but then I remembered hadn't changed the beneficiaries on my insurance policies. As I left, I sarcastically blew my wife a kiss. And she flipped me off. I had dinner with my folks and hung out there for the evening before leaving. I borrowed Dad's tool. The short-barreled 20-gauge would be perfect for the occasion. Marcy was already in bed when I got home. On probably reading, the only call on the recorder was from Karen boasting about her afternoon romp with Wally. Assured Marcy she'd be ready for later that night before signing off. I didn't aim to off Wally, just slow him down. Heck, I didn't want to off Tony either. I hoped Wally didn't have a weak heart like Tony did. I wanted to check if Marcy left the back deck door unlocked, but worried Wally might spot me, so I stripped down to my shorts and messed up. The bed blankets. I wished for a cup of coffee, but there was none, so I settled for a Coke. I waited in my recliner with the cell phone closed. He didn't show until after midnight. Once I saw him on the deck, I dialed emergency and reported an intruder. I made sure to say I felt my life was in danger and didn't hang up. The patio door slid open quietly and there was a Wall. I waited until he was inside and then did that. I aimed low not to off him. Accidentally, the first knocked him back onto the deck, and the second he fell over the deck side, breaking the railing. I knew he was alive because he was howling. That rock salt must have hurt like crazy. The Magnum was louder than I expected inside the house. My ears rang like crazy, and I turned on the lights. And in no time Marcy was in the living room screaming. I couldn't make out her words. I went to check on Wally and found a Magnum with a silencer on the floor. Marcy kept yelling, so I pointed at her, and she stopped and ran off. Like Wally broke his ankle in the fall. Some guys have all the luck. 10 minutes later, the first police car pulled up. There wasn't much talk. I placed the tool on the floor to make it clear. I gestured to the phone, and one of the officers told the emergency operator that things were okay. They asked if anyone else was home, so I mentioned Marcy in the bedroom. They brought her out, but it turned out to be a mix-up. She kept talking non-stop, and despite our efforts to quiet her down, it didn't work. Eventually a big female officer escorted her outside. I noticed Karen and some other neighbors outside. I smiled at her and made a throat-cutting gesture. She hurried away without smiling back. Arrived for Wally as Detective Green showed up. He grinned when he saw me, and I couldn't resist grinning back. Wasn't to be cheeky, I just couldn't help it. The female officer brought Marcy back inside so she could dress. She was a bit calmer once dressed. We all headed to the police station. I asked for separate cars, so Detective Green let me ride with him. We didn't chat on the way downtown, but he glanced over and smiled again when Green released me. It was already daytime, and despite our brief chat of about 30 minutes, they kept me there the whole night, and I felt like I was at Guantanamo with all the coffee they made me drink. A police car drove me home. Though I was a bit disappointed not to find the house cordoned off with yellow tape, it looked as if nothing had happened, not even a crack in the sliding GL door from the rock salt. I guess Wally bore the brunt of it, I estimated. It would take about an hour to fix the broken railing. I crashed into bed and didn't wake up until after lunch. Relieving myself, I stumbled into the kitchen to find Detective Green there, sipping coffee and reading the paper. Must have made the coffee while I was asleep, since I had my fill the night before. Opting for a large glass of orange juice, I settled across from him. Unsure how he got in. "You're quite the cool cat, Mr. Mercer," he remarked without looking up from the paper. Not knowing how to respond, I remained silent, unsure if he was joking. Finished his coffee. Detective Green: "The first need a shower, a shave, and some grub. I'll treat unless it violates some police protocol. Take your time." "Danny, I'm in no rush," he replied as I headed for the shower. wondering when he found time to rest. Lunch consisted of 2 hefty pulled pork sandwiches, and Green even joined me. In having a beer, we sat in silence for a while, and it started feeling heavy. "You're itching to ask me something, ain't you, Mr. Mercer? Are kind of funny. I was thinking the same about you when the detective signaled the waiter for 2 more drafts. I spent all night throwing questions your way. Now it's your turn, all right. First off, where's my wife?" "Still got her. Charges will be filed this afternoon. I finished my beer. Your wife's folks got her a lawyer." I wasn't expecting that. Now I had a ton more questions, but the more I asked, the more I risked letting on. I decided it was best to ease off. It was good to know Marcy's family was there for her. See you. I sure wasn't going to be. "I'm all out of questions, Detective Green, but if you've got something to get off your chest, feel free to spill the beans anytime." He took a big gulp of beer and chuckled, not too loud, but definitely a laugh. "Here's another thing you didn't catch. Was any of the chats between your wife and Mr. Williams? Did you or maybe record them?" "You mean Wally, right?" That earned me a bit of a smirk. "If I did happen to have a recording like that, would you want? I'm not sure yet. If things go like I reckon, it won't matter, but if either of they get a sharp lawyer, might come in handy. If I did have a tape, wouldn't that land me in hot water?" "You're onto something there, just trying to make my job a little easier. I'll see what I can do without a tape. That might or might not exist." I gave a little nod of thanks. "Danny boy, I reckon I should take you home. Your boys will be back from school soon, needing their dad." We got home just as Todd and Terry got off the school bus. They came over, and I introduced them to my new detective buddy. They wanted to see his badge, and everything seemed fine. Until Green leaned in and asked who built the tugboat and who made the monster truck. "I built the truck," Todd proudly exclaimed, puffing out his chest. "I did the tugboat." "Want me to show you, Terry?" Terry said, just as proud. "Maybe I'll check him out next time." "Got to run now," Green said as he left, grinning like he knew something he knew about the pink paint. I felt trapped with nothing I could do that night. We ordered pizza. The boys didn't ask about their mom after dinner. Marcy's dad called, asking for help to bail her out of jail. I declined. Politely. He might not have fully understood the situation, but at least he was trying to help. I asked where she'd stay. He hesitated, then said she'd be with them. We packed up Marcy's stuff and dropped it off easy enough. When we got back, I saw a U-Haul at Karen's. It was gone the next morning. Marcy never reached out to me. I had to check the newspaper daily to stay in the loop. Felt like I was deliberately kept out of the loop. Nobody bothered to clue me in. There was no trial. Marcy pinned everything on Wally. While he said it was her idea, they both ended up pleading guilty. Marcy got 3 to 5 years for planning a murder, and Wally got 5 to 10 years for attempting one. Federal authority got involved due to Wally's silencer, but they decided to wait until after his first sentence to press charges. Detective Green never mentioned the tape again. He didn't need it. Karen disappeared without a trait. Dad was happy to have his tool back. Joking that I could borrow it again if need be, I served Marcy with divorce papers once her jail term began, and she didn't contest. It seemed like she wanted nothing to do with me, as we hadn't spoken since the night I did that to Wally. I sold the house and moved back in with my parents since I couldn't work and care for the boys alone. Co-workers welcomed me back, and though offered a switch to day shift, I declined. I took the boys to see their mom at my women's prison every month. I'd wait in the car as they visited, typically less than an hour. Sometimes they'd meet outside in good weather, and I'd watch them from afar. I didn't ask about their visits, and I asked them not to tell me. Anything seemed to work out well for all of us. Everything was going smoothly until I received the phone call. "This Daniel Mercer?" "Yes, I'm Angela Hawkins. Detective Donnell Green suggested I reach out to you. There are some things we need to discuss." "I know, Detective Green, but why do you want to talk to me?" "Tony Marco was my brother." "No, just when I thought I was done with all this mess, something like this had to come up. I don't think that's a good idea. I'm sorry for your loss, but I can't help you." I ended the call before she could say more. 2 days later, she called again. "Daniel, I'd really appreciate it if you could meet me. There are things I need to say. Detective Green mentioned you're reasonable. Where would you like to meet?" "I'd prefer the auto show room, but anywhere you're comfortable is fine." It took me a bit to figure out what to say. I'll meet you Saturday morning at 10 o'clock at the showroom. I'll bring my 2 sons. They like checking out old cars. I didn't know what she was planning, but I felt safer in a public spot with the boys. Wasn't using them as a shield, but I thought she'd be less likely to try anything if they were there. I didn't know what kind of grudge this woman might have if she were Tony's sister. She must be Italian. If she was Italian, she might be fiery. I figured I was overthinking it and needed a beer. I called Detective Green to ask what's up. He laughed and said to meet with her and stress easy for him to say he didn't end. Her brother Continental Classics was a big place besides the main showroom. They had 2 big buildings in the back for cars needing work. I was surprised to see they were having a grand opening when we arrived. I didn't expect that there were a lot of things I didn't get. Terry and Todd was torn between the cars and the free stuff. The first thing that hit us was the smell of popcorn, and a guy in clown getup was handing out bags of it. There was a soda machine and another clown with a hot dog cart. The boys wouldn't I need lunch today. It wasn't hard to spot Angela Hawkins. I recognized her right away as she walked towards me with purpose. She had all the Italian traits. Dark hair, dark eyes, olive skin, and a curvy figure. Tony was big, but Angela was short and stout. As she came closer, I felt a bit nervous, especially when I saw her daughter beside her, the girl around 10 years old, looked just like her mom, but with lighter hair and no curves. It seemed we both used our kids as a sort of shield. She reached out her hand in a friendly gesture. Daniel Mercer, right? It felt natural to shake her hand. I've always wanted to say that, like in the Dr. Livingston movie, she said with a smile. Though she seemed a bit uneasy, which put me at ease since I was quiet, she kept talking. This is my daughter Carla. Carla greeted us with a smile. Todd said his name while Terry eagerly shook her hand. Carla, why don't you show the boys around while I talk to their dad? Terry followed Carla to the showroom, and Todd headed for the hot dog stand. It seemed like a positive start. We can chat down here or head up to my office for your call, I think. The office would work. Those were my immediate words as we headed towards the stairs leading up. I noticed some employees glancing our way and chatting amongst themselves. Angela saw it too and chuckled at my discomfort. Sporting blue bowling shirts for the opening stood out, but instead of focusing on shoppers, they seemed more interested in me. At the far end, one guy flashed a big smile and a thumbs up. Returned the smile but felt a bit uneasy. Did Detective Green fill you in on my situation at all? I didn't respond, just shook my head to indicate he hadn't. I won't bore you with my life story, but you should know a bit. Tony was my brother, my only family. When he passed without a will, I inherited his business. The executor took a chunk, but I got more than I expected. It was good to hear someone benefited from the ordeal. While she talked, I noticed her pierced ears and wedding ring. A small silver cross hung from her neck, though I found myself more distracted by her cleavage. Just as I started to refocus, she interrupted Mr. Mercer with me. It was a playful question, her smile confirming it. Sorry, I got distracted. I was just admiring your crucifix and reminding myself. To maintain eye contact, she playfully punched my arm. I want a beer. That sounds good. Next to the desk, there was a small fridge and she had to bend over to grab the drinks. One moment I found myself staring at her cleavage, and the next was face to face with a lovely rear end. She wasn't just explaining things, it felt like she was trying to charm me. Maybe it wasn't intentional, but it was definitely working. She popped open the can and passed it to me, making sure not to bend over too much. We both took a few sips without saying a word. Well, Angela, I'm happy things turned out well for you, but I'm not sure why I'm here. I should head back to the boys before they start worrying. It'd be better if you called me. Angela, can I call you Danny? Sure. So are we finished here? No, not yet. Just sit tight until I'm done. Detective Green said you'd get it. I stayed silent. I figured the quicker I zipped it, the quicker she'd wrap up. Tony was a jerk. He was rotten and got what he deserved. As it sounds, I wanted to thank you. It felt like a setup. Was that detective setting me up? Was the room bugged, or was she could easily have a bug tucked in her bra? Damn it, I caught myself staring at her cleavage again. You wired or recorded this? Of course not. Why would I do that? I finished my beer, still unsure. Maybe I should check on the boys. I don't want them getting into any mischief. Just stay put. She sounded pretty firm about it. I never had much love for Tony. About 3 years ago, my husband passed in an accident. He had no life insurance, and the guy who hit him was uninsured too. I had no job skills and a daughter to raise. Tony was my only family, so I reached out for help. Chipped in for part of the funeral costs, but that was it. He wouldn't even return my calls. So you're saying his passing was a blessing for you? Yeah, and it seems like it was for you too. Maybe we should both count our blessings and leave it at that. Angela grinned and finished her beer. You don't want to talk about this anymore, huh? I nodded and started to stand up. I need a favor from you. You're the only one who can help. What could I possibly do for you? You to join my team as the general manager. You're nuts. I don't know a thing about the car business, especially high-end ones like you've got down there. I know that I've got people for that. What do you need me for? Angela seemed a bit jittery. She was glancing at her feet, then the walls as if searching for the right words. Did you notice how my staff looked at you when you came up to the office with me? Yeah, they didn't seem too friendly. They all think you're the one who took out Tony, and not only that, but you made a joke out of it too. They used to fear Tony, and now they're scared of you. It's like they respect you out of fear. You catch my drift? They don't respect you. Nope, they're going to try to take advantage of me left and right, and I can't do a darn thing about it. I'm not tough or smart enough to keep him in line. What can I do? Just be here, and mostly eventually, we'll both get the hang of this business and be able to control things, but until then I need you to intimidate them. I'm a nice guy. Angela, that's why Tony and my wife thought they could push me around. She seemed more at ease now, but it didn't turn out too well. For them did it for some reason. I found that funny and let out a little laugh. For the next half hour, Angela and I hashed out the details. She had no problem offering me better pay and benefits than what I was getting at the factory. If things didn't pan out, I could always go back, but truth be told, I didn't really want to go back. I wanted this new gig to work out. Todd didn't look too good when we headed back downstairs, probably from all those hot dogs and soda. On the flip side, Terry was having a blast. He seemed more interested in chatting with Carla than checking out the cars, which was a positive sign. Todd ended up getting sick in the truck on the way home and skipped dinner. I started my new job that Monday, and things unfolded just as Angela said they would. I was surprised at how quickly I got the hang of things around the place. I got friendly with some of the staff and soon had insiders keeping an eye out on the floor. Turns out the guy in the blue shirt who gave me that big smile on the first day was Glenn's cousin, and he became my biggest supporter. Most of the staff wanted the business to do well and were more than happy to point out any troublemakers. Angela let me handle the firings, and I found out I kind of enjoyed it. I was really living up to my reputation. Detective Green popped in for coffee a few times, but our chats were usually casual and pleasant. Eventually, I got him to open up a bit. 3 years back was a cop down in Philadelphia who walked in one day to find my wife in bed with my boss. I gave him a beating then and there and threw my wife out. The department gave me the boot, so I landed a job here a week later. Before I left, I made sure that jerk who was with my wife got the boot too. I didn't press him for more info. It was his personal business, at least. Understood why he seemed to be on my side. The boys promised not to spill the beans about my new job to their mom. During visitation, they grumbled a bit about the long ride, but they understood there was no getting around it. I felt it was crucial for Marcy to see her sons, not so much for her sake, but to add a little salt to the wound. Yeah, I know. It's not the best way to involve your kids, but I got a twisted satisfaction out of it. Angela and I were spending more time together, both at work and off the clock. One weekend the boys insisted I take her and Carla to Nobles Grove. Usually, though we stuck closer to home, our living situations made any chance of romance complicated. Was definitely interested in getting closer to Angela, but it wasn't exactly convenient. I was still living with my parents and the boys while Angela and Carla were in a small studio apartment with the business doing better than expected. Angela started talking about buying a house. She spent a lot of time online looking for the right one. The call came when she mentioned wanting a 4-bedroom place. Danny, I think it's important for each of the boys to have their own room. It's better to sort that out now than to deal with it later, don't you agree? Of course, I realized it was a loaded question, and it dawned on me that Angela saw me as more than just an employee. The idea of a potential romance was becoming more promising. Yeah, I like that idea too, and I think having a split bedroom plan would be smart. I don't want the boys too close to the master bedroom, I said before leaving the office. Angela had a small smile on her face as I walked out. Our relationship was peculiar. Despite never having closeness or even coming close, I felt closer to her than I did to Marcy in 12 years. 2 days later, after my divorce from Marcy was finalized, we all went to Red Lobster to celebrate. The kids didn't know why we were celebrating, but Angela did later at the apartment while the kids were watching a pay-for-view movie. Kiss me in the kitchen. We hugged and giggled a bit until Carla walked in. Oh, sorry, Mom, she said, then added with a smile, it's about time back in the living room. Carla whispered something to Terry, and they both smiled. Angela and I behaved ourselves for the rest of the evening, but I was excited about what might happen next the following day. While the kids were in school, Angela and I took a long lunch break and returned to the apartment. We both had a lot of built-up energy to release. We didn't get back to work until just before quitting time. After that, we often took long lunches together, and Angela got serious about finding a house detective. Green visited us regularly, usually for casual chats, but sometimes to admire the cars. He especially liked a Studebaker Hawk once owned by Roger in the movie. Critic Angela gave him a good deal. Danny, I need you to take me to see Marcy. Came out of the blue. Even though we weren't visiting Marcy as often, she never seemed bothered by it. Is there a specific reason I need closure? She replied. I never quite grasped what that. I knew the words, but the idea puzzled me. Do you want me to come with you? Just drive me there. You don't have to be there when I talked to her on a warm, sunny autumn day. We arrived at Money. The inmate visits were outdoors, so I parked near the fence. 10 minutes later, Marcy and Angela emerged into the exercise yard and sat at a table. They were chatting and smiling like old friends. Things took a turn after 5 minutes. Marcy's smile vanished, replaced by a scowl as she leaned across the table towards Angela. Angela, however, remained cheerfully. Marcy lunged at her, but the guards quickly intervened, escorting Marcy back inside. Amid her protests, Angela glanced at me, smiled, and shrugged before leaving the visitor area. She was still grinning when she returned to the car. What was all that about your ex-wife? She was quite touchy, Angela said with a giggle. We drove in silence for a while until Angela turned to me. I introduced myself, and she seemed pleased to see me. Everything was fine until she realized I wasn't on her side. I may have misled her a bit at first. What's the deal? I told her I came from Baltimore for payback. She liked that, thinking it was against you, but really, I just meant I was taking over Tony's business to settle the score. Revenge can still happen against a lifeless guy. Can't it all be right? But why did it rile her up? She wanted details. Like when and how. Obviously she meant you. Now I was curious. I told her it took a really long time, and she asked if she wanted updates. She was all for it and demanded to know my exact plan. When I mentioned how she lost it, went totally nuts. It was priceless. All right, so spill it. How do you plan to off me? I got to hear this. Her grin widened. I told her I was going to have in love with you till the last. That's it. Yeah, pretty funny. Right, figured she might get mad, but didn't expect her to flip out like that. We both chuckled in silence for a bit. Was impressed. When's this supposed to start? As soon as we hit the next motel, silly? 2 months later, Angela and I tied the knot in a small backyard ceremony at our new place. Angela sent Marcy a wedding invite with a little note inside. Everything's going according to plan. He'll bite the dust in 40 or 50 years.